What's up, guys? How is everyone doing? All right, it's been a month since I've recorded anything, and honestly, I know in the past it's often been because I've just been neglecting my Magic Online duties or I haven't been playing enough to get any games worth recording. But the last month, honestly, objectively, has not been my fault. There was a bug with replays. They made a patch to the game roughly, I think, 5 weeks ago. It might have been actually for the new set or right around that time. But the patch completely broke, at least Commander. It may have broken other replays as well. I didn't actually test anything. But pretty much the Commander replays were showing up with only 20 life. So you'd start the replay, and both you and your opponent would be at 20. The UI would have absolutely no idea what to make of that, and the replay would pretty much be broken from the very beginning. You wouldn't even be able to see the commanders. You wouldn't be able to see any cards. You couldn't get the replay to progress even one turn. It was hopeless. And I tried and eventually just gave up in frustration. As a result, I didn't really play very many games. I played like a handful of games in that span. Actually, maybe more than a handful. I don't know. I'll have to check the record. And I'm actually going to go and do a sort of prospectus video to kind of talk about the last month of playing online. That will be a video for another day, probably tomorrow or the next day when I've got some more time to do that. Because I've got some games that were some excellent games to record, also some games that were losses that were, I think, probably interesting for people to watch. But to tide you over, for the meantime, I had this game that I just played against Mr. NVLL, a guy I've played in the past. He certainly recognized me and was excited to play. And you'll notice something interesting, actually. We both have 40 life. This was another strange thing that happened with that patch. So while the replays showed you having only 20, the game itself was reverted back to 40. And I can only suspect that this was done probably because they've completely abandoned the 1v1 online format, that whole misguided experiment that launched a few years ago. They had some tournaments for it a while ago that kind of went by the wayside. And I think people still play the format, although it's kind of just a gimped version of the regular multiplayer list. So obviously not very popular, never gained any traction outside of the confines of Magic Online. And I think rightfully so. I think the format was kind of a mess from the get-go, and it just kept getting steadily worse until everybody drifted away. But anyway, I've got a game right here. Just wanted to throw one up there to keep you guys happy and engaged until I can produce some more content in the days to come. So up against Neville, I am playing Nin the Pain Artist. I'm not sure why I went back to this deck. I think I was playing it just because I had quite a bit of run of bad luck a couple days ago with this deck, actually. I actually went and looked at an entire sort of prospectus on all of my games that I've played online since the records reset, and was winning about 93-94% of my games, and that includes a few random Canadian Highlander games and stuff where my win-loss ratio was different from Commander, where it's substantially higher because obviously the opposition is considerably softer. But anyway, used to winning about 93-94% of my games. I've had win streaks that were crazy, and to lose that many games in one day was pretty jarring and strange, and I was a little tilted, so I went and played Zur for a little while to soothe my ego and crush people, and felt like it was unfair. So then I switched back to a deck that's strong but didn't feel completely unfair, and that's the Nin deck. And you get a lot of really interesting pitch battles, and this game is no exception. If you notice, my opponent, Geist of St. Traft, a commander that is absolutely insane against devoted, nearly creatureless control decks like my own, and fairly mediocre against creature-heavy decks like Omnath, although they tend to play with a lot of ways to give their guys protection from creatures and evasion and just to make the Geist larger, kind of going Voltron on it. It can be very, very problematic and is obviously extremely dangerous against Nin if it gets in play, as I have so few cards that can actually interact with it, and it kills you pretty quickly, although with a 40 life buffer, you have quite a bit more breathing room since the commander itself only deals 2 damage a turn unless it's enchanted. So I've got an excellent hand. Obviously not ideal because it doesn't have that much fast mana, but it does have plenty of good mana colors along with an Arcane Signet, Gilded Lotus into Fact Fiction, and then hopefully into Gilded Lotus. And my hope really is that I just draw a counterspell on the next 2 or 3 turns before he lands Geist of St. Traft, or at least attempts it. Although I think I don't know how well he knows my deck, but I think he might be a little foolhardy to just ram his Geist on turn 3, although I've seen plenty of people do that, and more often than not, it works out for him. So maybe he'll do that too. I'm just hoping he respects untapped mana and he won't do anything. So obviously this is a snap keep. Off we go. Let me move the mouse little ways away here. And I'm just leading with Island. I'm not going to fetch right now because I'd like to get at least one more land out of the deck before I start thinning. Plus, with the printing of Mystic Sanctuary, you do have to be a little bit more thrifty with your use of fetch lands, because often you'll fetch a land early on, and then when a Mystic Sanctuary would be the perfect card to fetch, because of course it is an island and you can fetch it, and you'd be able to get a mana drain back on top of your deck, or one of the other really, really powerful effects like a rolling earthquake or maybe a cyclonic rift. And now you can't do it because you just sort of wasted a polluted delta or a flooded strand or something. So keep that in mind when you're playing with Mystic Sanctuary, and don't always just use your fetch lands right off the bat, even if it's time to thin. So be judicious with them. I'm just hoping he doesn't have, obviously, Crypt Soul Ring, Mox Diamond, Chrome Mox, all the things that can allow him to accelerate the Geist out before I can counter. And he has come into play tapped land that gains a life. So clearly not particularly high budget, and I should be fine if I can just draw a counterspell, right? All right, well, Wayfarer's Bauble is not the worst thing. I'm going to fetch right here, and I think I'm fetching because I've drawn the Bauble now. I don't really want to take the damage off the Fiery Islet because, all right, what's that pronounced? Islet? It's probably pronounced Islet. Fiery Islet, because every point of life is probably going to matter against the Geist if it starts beating me down. And I got to assume at this point I'm not going to draw a counterspell before he casts the Geist, and I can't stop it. So I'm just doing that to save life. Play the Signet, play the Bauble. All right. Now, hopefully I get one more turn of reprieve, and then I can use Expedition Map to go get... So my plan next turn is to basically sack the Expedition Map and go get a Strip Mine to kill off the Refuge, and hopefully just buy myself one more turn to draw into a counterspell to stop Geist, because that is... Well, we've reached like Red Alert at this point. And then he has Arcane Signet, which of course completely counterfeits that play. I cannot gamble that he doesn't have another land in play, so I'm just going to have to assume that I draw a counterspell here, and I don't. I get another island. I'm definitely going to play that. Okay, so a lot of different choices here. I could have gone and gotten a Strip Mine and gambled about the fact that he might not have a third mana source to cast his Geist. I could cast Nin the Pain Artist and use Wayfarer's Bauble or Expedition Map at the end of the turn. Those are all very, very viable options. But I do have Fact or Fiction in hand, and I kind of decide that my best chance of getting him to not just play his Geist, because there's no way he can know that in my 3-card hand, in my basically mono blue deck, that I have no counterspells. And I figured that he'll respect 4 mana more than he'll respect just 2. And if he does, in fact, not cast his Geist and he casts something else, then I can cast Fact or Fiction. And even if he does, in fact, cast the Geist, I can cast Fact or Fiction and maybe get lucky and hit the Force of Will or maybe a Daze. And he casts Enlightened Tutor during end step, which is very interesting, and fetches up Karmic Justice. Interesting. Well, normally people get artifact mana with that, but I guess he has a reason for getting Karmic Justice. Maybe he assumes that I'm going to have to kill his Geist in some way. Little does he know, I only really literally run one card that can kill it when it's sitting in play. Yeah, well, I got to just hope he just casts Karmic Justice instead of casting his Geist. That would be wonderful for me. He taps some mana, he casts Talisman of Progress. When he plays this, I'm just 100% certain he's going to cast the card he just tutored for. But no, he doesn't. He just gets the perfect read. And I actually, when he casts the Enlightened Tutor, I pause for a good 10 seconds before allowing it to fall off the stack, because I really, really wanted to bluff a counterspell, and he did not respect that. So he taps out to play Geist. Gives me quite an opening here. I have a few outs, and unfortunately none of them are on top of the deck. And I've got Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Rolling Earthquake. I also have Daze and Force of Will as ways to potentially stop this. And unfortunately none of them are in hand. So we're going to have to go with Plan B, which is play mana, draw cards with Nin, and draw your way out of it before you die, which is sort of the game plan with this deck most of the time. And I sure have a lot of mana right now. Haven't really drawn much else. All right, well, let's draw something good. That is not something good. The Lone Mountain. And by the way, in case anybody, I get asked this question all the time when people ask for the deck list. Why are you playing with snow-covered islands? Like, are you playing with Skred or something? And the real reason is because when I put this deck together, it had scrying sheets in it. And I got a bunch of snow-covered lands for the scrying sheets, and I was too lazy to ever change them. So that's why I have snow-covered land in my deck. And at some point in time, I probably should change these over to some more flashy lands. All right, so I'm thinking about this turn. There's a lot of choices here. I'd really, really like to get the Gilded Lotus in play, but the problem is that the Gilded Lotus does not allow me to cast Nin because it can only make 3 blue or 3 red. I could also cast Dynamo, but that leaves me with exactly the same problem, which is that I don't have blue and red. And I really, really want to get these mana artifacts online so that I can have Nin block and blast herself. But the problem is that doing either of those things gives him an entire unfettered turn, which means he gets all of his blue mana untapped. He could definitely potentially counterspell and could enchant the Geist in wicked, evil ways, and I would just be too far behind. And if he just counterspells Nin twice, I can just die to the Geist if it's enchanted. So as much as I would love to get one of these powerful mana artifacts online, I just don't have that kind of time, and I have to just regretfully see me tapping my land forlornly and eventually realizing, you know what, yeah, there's just no way to make this work. Let's just play Nin, cross our fingers and hope. It sucks to have, whatever this is, 9 mana in hand. But one of the reasons why I love this deck so much, and other people who have played this deck can certainly attest to this fact, that this deck is the ultimate Flourish and Mana Flood deck. The more you Mana Flood, the more powerful the commander becomes. All right, he's tapping mana. That's not good. All right, that's just the Karmic Justice. Don't particularly care about that, since I would happily Rolling Earthquake away the Geist and let him kill something if it meant I could counter it when it tries to come down again. All right, so he's attacking. And one of the things I actually have found against the Geist deck is that if you can get Vidalcan Shackles in play, the Angels do come into play tapped and attacking, but you can mitigate 4 damage a turn with the Shackles just by snagging an Angel, and sometimes that buys you more than enough time to, provided that he's not able to buff the power of the Geist, it buys you enough time that you never, in fact, wind up losing to damage. And additionally, after you grab an Angel, of course, you can blast it with Nin the Pain Artist and draw cards off of its corpse, which is always quite great. All right, well, I'm taking 6. Token goes away, nothing else, which is scary. He's got 3 mana available, so I'm just going to use my bauble at the end of the turn here. Obviously, there's no Strip Mine plan, since that would activate Karmic Justice. All right. Plus, keep in mind, Expedition map, now that I've got 5 islands in play, can fetch the aforementioned Mystic Sanctuary in case I do get something that I need to double up on. All right, a Dissolve isn't bad. All right, so I'm going to lead. I can safely play Thran Dynamo here because even if he does have a counter spell for it, that's fine. I still have 3 mana left to Dissolve. And hopefully he doesn't counter it, since I need the mana for Nin. And there was no temptation to play Gilded Lotus for that reason. I just can't. Against a deck like this, they just run like so much evil stuff that like gives it double strike and +3/+3, just crazy and Voltron type enchantments on it. A Sword of Fire and Ice would just be totally death. And even worse things, more ruinous things like Armageddon. So you kind of have to just tiptoe around it and hope that they don't have all the good stuff. He's got no land. He plays Open the Armory. Makes perfect sense to be in the deck. And he gets a card I've never seen before, Staggering Insight. +1/+1. It basically gives it lifelink and also makes it an Ophidian. Pretty good right now. So we'll see what happens here. So he plays Staggering Insight, and I'm about to counter it with Dissolve. You'll see me tap 3 mana here, 2 blue and 1. And I'm thinking for a second, I realize, you know what? Actually, this has Scry. If there's a really, really good card on top of my deck, like say a Rolling Earthquake or maybe a Cyclonic Rift or something that can bail me out of the situation, even a Tezzeret the Seeker, just something powerful that will allow me to shore up the board state. I don't want to have to. Basically, I'm not going to scry it away. Of course, I'm going to put it on top, and that means I can't use my Expedition map, which means I can't put the Mystic Sanctuary in my hand and then put the Dissolve back on top of my library. And it basically screws things up. So with that in mind, I have to sack Expedition map before I cast the Dissolve so that I don't have to reshuffle the top of my library with the map if I want to use it. Now, of course, that carries one small element of risk, just one tiny little element of risk here. And that's the card Mana Leak, which I actually considered. I thought about, well, what if he has Mana Leak and I do this play? I get totally punished. Although it's not like the worst punish in the world. I mean, this card's a pain in the ass, but it's not game over. So I decide, you know what? I'm going to risk it. There's no way he's got Mana Leak, right? 86 cards. He hasn't represented any counter magic. I'm going to go get the Mystic Sanctuary as planned. And yeah, let's just Dissolve that. Staggering Insight, bro. He taps 2 mana. And he has Mana Leak, of course. So I get totally punished. Brutal. All right, fine. Have an Ophidian with Hexproof that also happens to hit for an extra 4 damage a turn. Brutal. All right, so, yeah. Well, that's something of a card drawing engine, but it's not as powerful as Mighty Nin. He is kind of tapped out right now. God damn. Flooded Strand, that is not handy. All right, well, I'm definitely playing Mystic Sanctuary here and putting the Dissolve on top of my library, so I've got a counterplay to his next turn, provided he hasn't drawn more counter spells. We'll see what happens here. Just gotta be able to stop anything ruinous. All right, tapping a bunch of land. Fall of the Thran. Well, that first ability, destroy all lands. Wow. So, what a weird card. I'm like, why would he play this with this? I got to assume he has Armageddon as well. Destroy all lands. Well, yeah, I mean, I get 4 lands back over 2 turns, but there is no game plan that involves really combating Geist of St. Traft with all of my lands destroyed. Even though I could play Gilded Lotus, I feel like this just slows me down way too much, and will probably buy him enough time. Plus, I have like this plan to use my Vidalcan Shackles potentially to stop the Angel. So with that in mind, I feel like this might be a bait spell, but I'm going to take the bait and have Nin blow herself up. And I'm not going to play around something like a Daze or Force Spike or anything, or Mana Tithe, just because if it goes off, it goes off, but I'd prefer it doesn't. So Nin shoots herself for 6. I know it's on top of the deck. That's the Dissolve, and I get 2 more counter spells plus Baral and a very, very useless Vandal Blast, given that there's Karmic Justice in play. All right, so I'm going to dissolve this, and I'm doing the dissolve. Obviously, there's probably, I don't know, it might be better to just forbid with buyback here, since it's very unlikely he can counter back. Well, I guess it's not that unlikely, but I just want to, he knows that I have the dissolve in hand, so I'm not going to show either one of these cards. And there's a Stoic Rebuttal, which I would normally be very, very happy to see, but that is not very useful right now, and given the fact that I've got Forbidden in hand, I've already got plenty of 2-mana counters, or 3-mana counter spells, so just going to tuck that to the bottom. Take a beating, 7 more damage. Oh, yeah. Well, good thing I've got 40 life to work with, because I would be at 9 right now. And then he's got Eel Umbra post-combat, which is going to be even more problematic now he can regenerate the Geist of St. Traft if I do draw one of my outs. So that's reducing me down to, well, just the Cyclonic Rift plus the various targets for it, or the various things that get it. Getting more uncomfortable. I'm going to definitely take more damage. I draw a totally useless Treachery. I would be shocked if this has any actual targets in his entire deck, since most of the good Geist decks tend to just run a million ways to make the Geist deadly and don't run any other creatures at all. Okay, well, I got tons of mana, so it's time for the Lotus. And I will play my Nin, and I will play Baral. Got to be happy with Baral, plus the ability to double Forbid in 1 turn. It's pretty juicy. And he only has 1 card in hand. So even though I'm getting my ass kicked by this Geist, and I'm now essentially taking 8 damage a turn while he draws an extra card, I feel like I'm quite favored here, just because of how crazy strong Nin is with all this mana. All right, he plays a Temple of Enlightenment before attacking, which I like a lot. And then he casts Divine Reckoning. Weird. It's like a wrath that spares his single creature. It's pretty high-tech card, actually, particularly when you're playing Voltron style. And I'm almost on the verge of not countering this, just because the Baral isn't that handy. But he has no more cards in hand. There's no real risk. I have perfect information right here, and I figure that this also cycles a card through the Baral if I successfully counter. And I've got a bunch of superfluous lands in place, and so I'm going to draw a million cards next turn. These lands are all basically useless. So with that in mind, I decide, you know what, even though this card isn't really that dangerous, I think that just cycling a card and casting the Forbid right now and giving myself more options is worthwhile. So, of course, I draw off Baral. I get Mox Diamond, which I'm going to chuck in the graveyard since I want to keep my hand size bigger. Thanks to the Forbid, the Mox is basically, well, I mean, each one of these cards is half a counter spell. So throwing away a Mox is like throwing away a full counter, or casting the Mox is like throwing away a full counter spell, and I don't need the mana right now at all. All right. So I gave some thought to blocking here, figuring that does mean that if he flashes back the Divine Reckoning, it won't do anything, but I kind of want him to do it. I kind of want him to cast Divine Reckoning next turn with flashback. And since I'll have the ability to block with Nin that turn, I can just let Baral die. And so with that in mind, I decided to just take the full hit, even though it means he gets to draw another card. All right, untap. Full untap step. Amnesia. Well, that's interesting. That definitely has some longer-term potential with Cyclonic Rift, which is really kind of my only out right now. I do have Karn Liberated in the deck, so I could use Karn to potentially kill the Eel, exile the Eel Umbra, and then destroy Geist with a Rolling Earthquake. But we are running out of time, so not really a lot of options left. I'm certainly not going to cast Amnesia on a one-card hand, given that it's half a counter spell. All right, he starts to tap mana. All right, it's got to be the Divine Reckoning. Yeah, it is. Okay. So quite happy that I actually I counterspelled this because it's basically time walking him to play it. It doesn't really change the board state at all. I mean, sure, I can't block with Baral and shoot it, but I'm pretty confident that in all these cards I'm going to draw, I should be able to handle the Geist of St. Traft anyway. I mean, this is just why this commander is so amazing. You can just be totally screwed and have no answer, but because your commander can just draw gigantic chunks of your deck, you can recover from nearly unwinnable game board positions. All right, I'm going to fetch in response. Sanctuary is already there, so I'm just going to get an island. All right, so you notice I actually accidentally almost clicked and selected Baral over Nin. And if I had done that, I would have lost this game for sure. That would have been incredibly bad. And then I realized, wait a minute, okay, so you choose the creature you want to keep. All right, so I'm keeping Nin. Baral dies. 7 mana to kill a Baral. It's probably never happened before. And he plays Spirit Mantle, which normally I wouldn't care about too much, but unfortunately this means that the Geist cannot be blocked by anything, and that really, really reduces the range of my outs. Guarantees he draws a card. This has to be countered, even though it means I draw 3 less cards off my Nin. But he is tapped out at least, so I do have free reign to tap out completely. I'm going to throw away the Amnesia. I figure, yeah, it's a little painful to do that because I could rift my way out of this, but I don't really care about any of these other cards particularly. I just need to keep Geist out of play because these cards don't do anything if you can't cast the Geist. So I don't feel like the Amnesia is really that important right now versus obviously the value of the 2 counter spells and potentially Vandal Blast to kill like an equipment or something that's problematic. All right, so Nin's going to do her block and suicide thing. This is a big activation. Wow. What is this? 4, 5 plus 7 is 15 mana. Wait, I did that wrong. No, it's 12. I'm sorry, guys, it's late. 12 mana, so that's a draw 10. Yeah, pretty good effect. Oh, no, it's 11. I guess there's 1 extra mana. Wow. All right, and off that, look at all this stuff. It starts from here. So Tezzeret, all this stuff. Whir, Brainstorm. Into the Royal, very handy for bouncing the enchantments. That can also bounce an Angel if need be. But this gets me the Shackles that I talked about before. So I can grab an Angel, and that mitigates a ton of the damage. I've got Karn Liberated to kill enchantments, but most importantly, Muddle the Mixture, one of the tutor effects that gets the Rift, and I've got boatloads of mana. All right, and I drew Snapcaster Mage too, which is phenomenal due to aforementioned Amnesia discard. All right, let's play that Tezzeret the Seeker, since it literally generates 1 mana. It's pretty good. All right, lots of different options here. I could, if you look at my mana, I've got, what do I have? 3, 6, 9, 10, plus 5 more on tap there. 15, 16, 17, 18. So that's enough mana to Transmute Muddle, cast Cyclonic Rift, and also Snapcaster and cast Amnesia. Is that enough? Let's see. Well, this is the Transmute mana for the Muddle. Yeah, so Rift is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I have exactly enough mana to do that. However, even if I were to do that, my opponent would just, he would discard all this stuff, but he'd still have 7 mana and he'd just replay Geist of St. Traft, and I'd be in pretty much the same position again. I mean, I could do some kind of desperate thing like Tezzeret the Seeker for a Phyrexian Metamorph, which I did in a different game against Geist recently, but that is pretty much a losing play, particularly when your opponent has you this low in life. So with that in mind, I'm just going to have to stall here, use the Rift now, let him have his hand for the time being, and deal with the Geist and keep it out of play. Since the rest of this stuff doesn't really matter too much. All right, so I'm tapping a bunch of mana here. There's the Rift. Everything goes back to his hand. His hand looks so juicy. God, I would love to just Amnesia him, but I can't do that. It's not safe. I guess I could play Mana Crypt. Let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, it would leave me with 2 mana in play. I could remand the Geist. Nah, it's still stupid. There's no way that works out. So I got to just go with that play that I mentioned before. So I'd like to play as much stuff as possible from my hand. I decide I can actually safely play the Mana Crypt due to the fact that I've got Into the Royal and Karn. So I can either bounce it back to my hand, or if in a total emergency, I can Karn it to get rid of it. And I figure like I need the mana right now because I'd rather not discard. That allows me to play the Coalition Relic almost for free. Just deploying more mana here and then throwing away the rest of the junk in my hand. I don't foresee Ancient Tomb being very useful at 6 life. Vandal Blast, not too concerned about. I've only seen 2 of those relatively crappy artifacts. And finally, I don't think Brainstorm is all that useful right now, so I'm going to throw that away. Leaving a fair amount of mana available and looking pretty robust. So he's going to redeploy all of his mana artifacts. He's got 5, and there's the Geist. And I'm just going to remand it here, because I'd love to have it in his hand for next turn. And he's got no further play. Excellent. And he actually messaged me when I played the Crypt, and he said, that seems a little risky, doesn't it, at 6? And I said, yeah, but, you know, got to do what you got to do. Of course, I've got this lovely answer in my hand. All right, charge looking pretty good here. Crucible of Worlds. Solid. God, Crucible Forbid is so insane. I've got all these lands in here. No Wasteland, unfortunately, although I do have both Whir and Tezzeret to go get Strip Mine, if need be, through the Expedition map, and then I could start recursing Crucible. And he's a little vulnerable to, to artifact destruction. If I kill these things off, he might wind up not having any blue mana. But I don't think the game's going to go that long at this point. All right. God, Tezzeret is so juicy. So I'm going to play Snapcaster. And now the Amnesia comes down. There it is. God, so brutal. And he pretty much says, yeah, I think that's probably going to do it. And you see him make his like Eel Umbra play onto my Snapcaster Mage. And then he discards 4 cards out of his into the graveyard, and the his commander goes back to the command zone, where it will now cost even more mana. And I'm just playing some more stuff here. Karn Liberated comes down. I'm just going to kill one of his mana sources. And with that done, and realizing that he has no way to deal with both the Forbid and potentially other counterspells in my hand, Neville wisely packs it in, and this game comes to a close. I just thought this was an awesome game. Geist to St. Traft is always a pain in the ass with Nin. Usually you can keep it out of play at the beginning unless they get a really fast draw because of the amount of counterspells in here, but sometimes it just gets out and it runs amok, and you can't really interact with it very well because you just have so few creatures, and often it's too big anyway. And this was a really, really good example of that, and I think just a good example of Nin's raw power to get you back into a game where you're sorely behind due to the fact that they're just beating you down and all you have is mana. So that is my first game in roughly a month that I've posted. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will have some more games coming soon, including some losses. Yes, I know, what a concept. See you guys then. Take care.